Давайте приступим к программе этой сессии. К сожалению, у нас очень мало времени и очень много интересных исследований. Я, как автор или соавтор одного из них, очень переживал по поводу того, что у каждого из выступающих будет только по 7 минут, чтобы убедить нас в ценности их исследовательской работы. Тем не менее, я прошу всех занять места и максимально сосредоточиться, потому что я думаю, что плотным потоком на нас будет поступать ценная информация о городах, и нам надо быть готовыми к тому, чтобы максимально ее воспринять и усвоить. Я быстро представлю исследования, которые будут участвовать в сессии, представлю участников. Или давайте я буду по одному. К счастью, Андрей Шаронов доехал таки до нас, и я с удовольствием предоставлю ему честь представить исследование.
Спасибо. Очень рад вас видеть. Прошу прощения за опоздание. Надеюсь, что вам было чем заняться здесь. Мы всегда говорили о том, что хорошая конференция отличается от плохой тем, что для хорошей специально готовятся исследования. И вот как раз мы находимся в ситуации, когда у нас есть возможность послушать исследования, которые были подготовлены к нашему урбанистическому форуму. Я с удовольствием представлю участников и темы их выступлений. Это Сергей Левкин, руководитель департамента градостроительной политики и строительства города Москвы, и Катя Шапочка, партнер компании PwC. Они анонсируют результаты исследования «Города, основанные на данных», и представит исследование «Города возможностей от Москвы до Сан-Паулу». Это традиционное исследование, которое компания PwC делает уже в течение ряда лет. Далее мы коротко послушаем Остина Килроя, руководителя программы World Bank Competitive Cities. Он представит исследование «Конкурентные города» от имени Всемирного банка. Далее выступит господин Душка Багунович, профессор городского дизайна, Институт технологий Юнитек, Новая Зеландия, который представит исследование «Городское развитие и планирование. Глобальные тренды и актуальные практики». Он представляет организацию «Сокарп». Егор Котов, научный сотрудник Высшей школы экономики, представит исследование «Москва. Конкурс на полицентричность». И, наконец, Лена Короткова, старший аналитик Центра городских компетенций школы Сколково, представит исследование управления пространственно-экономическим развитием города. Мы сильно съехали по регламенту, поэтому я прошу придерживаться времени выступлений 7 минут. Итак, мы начинаем. Сергей Левкин, Екатерина Шапочка. Пожалуйста.
Доброе утро. Я надеюсь, что видно все-таки экран за мной. Я хочу рассказать об исследовании «Города возможностей от Москвы до Сан-Паулу». Это исследование мы делаем 3-й раз специально для урбанистического форума московского. Значит, это исследование носит социально-экономический характер, то есть оно достаточно комплексное, и цель его сравнить Москву с лидирующими, развивающимися городами мира. Почему? Потому что нам кажется, что мы должны себя сравнивать с теми городами, которые растут, которые показывают очень серьезную динамику в показателях, и с теми городами, которые сталкиваются с теми же проблемами роста, скажем так, которые испытывает Москва. Так, сейчас. Как это делается? Извините, пожалуйста. Исследование, как я сказала, носит комплексный характер. На экране вы видите те области, в рамках которых мы исследуем города. Это и интеллектуальный капитал инноваций, уровень технологической готовности, город как центр притяжения, здравоохранение, безопасность, защищенность, устойчивое развитие, окружающая среда, демография и приспособленность для жизни, транспорт и инфраструктура и ряд экономических также параметров. В общей сложности порядка 67 7 переменных. И в этом году мы немножечко совершенствовали методику. Я об этом скажу более конкретно позже. Города, с которыми мы сравниваем Москву, как я сказала, развивающиеся центры притяжения, представляющие все континенты мира: Сан-Паулу, Мехико, Стамбул, Мумбай, Джакарта, Пекин. Основные результаты. Вот эта таблица самая, наверное, важная, я на ней остановлюсь.
What it is. So the main outcome, Moscow for the first time is on the first place. Beijing used to be far ahead on some parameters. Today Moscow is leading. Why? First of all, intellectual capital and innovations. Moscow went up thanks to the entrepreneurial environment. Moscow and Russia in general improved its global entrepreneurship level. Technological readiness. Moscow went up in this area as well, thanks to internet access in schools and speaking about the city as the world attractiveness center. Moscow is number one today in the rating of best airports of the world. Transport and infrastructure. Moscow is leading far ahead with 12 points ahead. We're leading in the number of projects under construction and in the number of people working in construction, and we're sharing the first place with Beijing in terms of the sites commissioned. Healthcare, safety and security were number one again. Number three again. We improved the air quality thanks to the method that we're using. If we used to use surveys, now we're using air quality sensors. In terms of sustainable development and demography, we have quite active lifestyle in Moscow, which improved its rating. Economic effect, Moscow is number 2. In terms of doing business rating, we improved by 3 points. In terms of expenses, we fell a little behind because of the exchange rate. We take into account here, for instance, the consumer basket price. In general, there are several indicators in which Moscow is showing definitely high levels of development. You can see them on the screen, and I would like to say that the positive changes we see every day in terms of comfort, in terms of services, accessibility, it is reflected in our rating. Then, well, this, if we speak about the opportunities in the city from Moscow to São Paulo, I would also like to present the cities based on data rating. It will be presented at 12:45. It will be an attempt to compare how ready the cities are in terms of their technological development, in terms of their technological solutions. In general, I would like to say that it was quite an interesting study. The technological readiness level, it's at the level of New York, Sydney and Barcelona, one of the most advanced cities, and we implement most of it in transport, safety and healthcare, and the involvement of people in the city management will present it later on. Thank you. Moscow is a megalopolis, no doubt about it. The 6th Urban Forum you're at this year, I think, is of high interest in terms of the participants. Just for your information, we have 7,985 participants, 609 media participants, and 85 delegations. The Major already announced that. As any megalopolis, together with other cities, we fight for human capital, and then on the second place for the investment capital. It is very important what the government does and how it is seen by the international ratings. Ekaterina presented 2 studies, one that has been conducted for 3 years in terms of the development of the growing cities, fast-growing cities, and Moscow plays in it, but points in this rating are accumulated through different ratings and different indicators, and they collect data based on surveys, expert opinions, and sometimes looking at this study, for instance, in terms of safety and security, well, São Paulo is better than Moscow, but I can't really believe that. I can't believe the statistics, because comparing security in Moscow and São Paulo, I would say Moscow is one of the most secure and safe cities in the world in terms of streets and everyday life. So, together with PwC, we set a goal for ourselves. Let's compare ourselves to 11 cities around the world. You see them on the slides, not only developing but also developed, stable cities. And we analyze the statistics, only the statistics, from these countries on municipal levels, based on data that is officially published by the governments. So the analysis we've made shows data from 11 cities, and what have we come to? It's an independent study. We only asked for the cities we want to be compared to, and then Ekaterina and her team collected all this data from the municipal statistics. Outcomes. Well, I have little time, so just a couple of points. Construction pace, one of the highest in the world in terms of the surface built per capita. We're one of the leaders, going ahead Singapore, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. In the last 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, the real capital investment per capita in national rate, because you can't really compare in dollars today, it's difficult. So the investment growth rate significantly higher than other cities, 4.4%, and then the number of growth of the office spaces per capita is 22. A positive, stable trend in terms of housing accessibility. Of course, housing is not really accessible for Moscow citizens, but in terms of growth rate of this accessibility, we're number 1. And this index is calculated based on the US Realtor method. So it's not our method, it's their method. And the scale of construction, the overall commission level, 255 meters per square kilometer. There is this indicator, and we can be proud of the railway transport. Only Berlin today is ahead of us, but I can say that when we launch the third metro ring and the Moscow City Railway ring. We will not only be at the level, but we will outperform Berlin. Of course, our metro is something we're proud of, and of course, the high frequency of trains and the amount of people that are transported by the metro is very high. And we have 2 billion people transported every year. And we have 1.7 in New York, 1.6 in Hong Kong, and then 3 people per car, per metro car, and per kilometers, while in New York it's 3.2 and 6.1 in Hong Kong. So the yearly load of metro is smaller than in other cities. Wealth of Moscow citizens is growing thanks to the amount of cars, while the public transportation and congestion level decrease is also very significant. We see that people commute more in public transport. So the goal that we set for ourselves 5 years ago is really being achieved, and Muscovites, they're really using more comfortable and more efficient public transport. We're leaders in terms of the number of green areas. We are outperformed by Hong Kong. In terms of the IT development, we are outperformed only by Seoul in terms of number of Wi-Fi hotspots. So just highlighting the most important points and showing where Moscow is, I can confidently say that the government program that we are implementing, that the major is implementing, it delivers true results and can be evaluated by well-known international rating agencies. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Austin Kilroy.
So first of all, thanks a lot for having me. It's brilliant to be here, and especially in a sort of chill-out room at the back. So I hope everyone's sitting comfortably. You definitely look comfortable. I'm going to give you a brief overview of work that we've been doing for the last two or 2.5 years, and I'm here with my colleague who's more intelligent and better looking than me, but he's not on stage this time, called Dmitry Savayev, who you met a little bit earlier. The report is here. We've brought about 20 copies with us, which I think is not quite enough, assuming that you're interested in this. And we have also prepared with the forum a translation into Russian of the executive summary, so I hope that's useful. I'm going to carry on speaking in English, so if you need an earpiece, please go ahead and get one. Okay. So we started this research project from the perspective that cities are really important to the world economy, but they perform differently. And as you can see from the map behind me, sorry, I'm small, but I'm not small enough that you can see everything on the screen. Performance is very lumpy. So you have some cities which are powering ahead and other cities which are stumbling along. And we set out to understand what do the successful ones do differently, particularly from the economic standpoint. So economic growth, job creation, productivity, what were those cities actually doing, and how can we learn from them? And these were the questions that mayors and other heads of city administrations were asking us. How have other cities created jobs and growth? What should be the top priorities for my city? I don't have infinite resources. I need to prioritize. How do I get it done? So we tried really hard to answer these questions, and we did a literature review, we did analytic work, we did case studies, we did econometric analysis. We threw everything that we had as economists and researchers at the problem within a 2-year period. And obviously we didn't have infinite funds either, so we had to prioritize. And that's not the end of the presentation, but here we are, okay. So what we noticed, first of all, was that looking at economic performance, it's not just about looking at the famous names that we're all familiar with, London, Tokyo, Singapore, New York, Moscow, etc. It's also about looking at secondary, smaller cities, and these are actually some of the fastest growing cities in the world. So what are they doing, and what can we learn for other parts?
Потому что
So we looked at what do successful cities do, who does it, and how do they get it done. I'm monitoring the clock a little bit, because I know I'm not going to have quite enough time. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to tell a story. Rather than give an overview of the whole report and the 8 background papers and all the rest of it, I'm going to tell you a story about one city. And this is a city in Turkey, which we wondered whether it was the right time to present a Turkish example in Russia, but I understand that you guys are friends again now, or becoming friends again. So it's in eastern Turkey, and it's a very difficult situation. It's a dry part of Turkey. It's very far from Istanbul. It's, I don't know whether you can see here, it's very blurry, but it's on the border with Syria. You now have 300,000 refugees in this city, so they've always had a difficult time. What would you do if you were the mayor of this city? So we're all, to some extent, urban policymakers, economic development practitioners. What would you do? So the land is dry, there's no agriculture around, or at least not in the immediate vicinity. It's 210 kilometers from a port. The population is low skilled. There are no high-tech clusters, there's no biotech just around the corner. But this is what they've managed to achieve. From 2003, this is the same part of the city, between 2003 and 2014. And these actually are all carpet producers. So the carpet that some of you are sitting on at the moment, very large carpets, you have these huge factories producing those. And a lot of the buildings that you see there are carpet factories. So they now export to 175 countries around the globe. They multiply their exports 10 times over a short period of time. Very fast GDP growth and fast jobs growth. So this to us was an interesting story. We needed to try and explain it. What do they do? So first of all, we put at the center of our framework firm-level performance. So it was very important to understand how firms were performing. If you're trying to do economic development, firms, private sector firms are going to be the engines of those. That's both the growth of existing firms, new investors, and startups. And we looked at 4 different categories of intervention. So that's institutions and regulations, infrastructure and land, skills and innovation, enterprise support and finance. So what kind of things did they do? Well, for example, you saw there the carpet factories. It was very important to make sure that the plot sizes in the economic zone were the right size for carpet factories. But a few years ago, they had much smaller firms, so they had smaller plots. So they configured the infrastructure towards the firms that they had. The institutions and regulations, they had a one-stop shop within the zone, so they made it very easy for firms to get the regulations that they needed. But they also tried to improve infrastructure across the city. So I'm simplifying the story a lot, but what we noticed here was that cities were doing economy-wide interventions that benefited all firms, but they were also taking strategic bets, as many of you do in the cities that you work in, including Moscow, I think. I hope that wasn't directed at me. Anyway, so now some of the graphs that you would expect a World Bank presenter to present, a key thing that we noticed here was that looking around the world, the top 10% of cities look very different from the rest of the 90% of cities measured by economic growth. So you can see here the top 10% of cities, the big difference is that it's tradable sectors that are pulling the economy forward. By tradable, I mean things that you can compete compete with other cities on. So that includes carpets, it also includes tourism, it includes agribusiness, it includes other types of light manufacturing. And you can see here the top 10% of cities on the left-hand side of the screen are growing much faster in those tradable sectors. So if you want to grow your local economy, focus on the tradable sectors. The other things, hairdressing, retail, shopping malls, hotels, they will come of their own accord. How am I doing on time? 1 more minute.
Gone, but 30 minutes left.
30 seconds. Okay.
30 seconds.
So the very quick story which you can find in our report, and I'd encourage you to talk to Dimitri, not just because you'd enjoy talking to him anyway, to pick one up. Who did it? Crucially important in Turkey was the interaction between public and private spheres. And we'll tell you a bit more about that, but there were 300 delegates from various city stakeholders that were involved in this planning process and really were integral to pushing it forward. The city government actually played a relatively minor role. The city government does not always have to be in the lead, and they certainly weren't in this Turkish example. Lastly, there was a coherent strategy. So this was something agreed with all 300 participants. Just to sum up, this is not just a Turkish example. We looked at 6 cities around the world. We looked at data from 750 cities. The findings are detailed a little bit more in the report. I'd encourage you to read it. We think it's relevant to cities in a lot of places. So just summing up what I would have presented, we hope that this is going to be useful to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Austin, and it was a voice of appreciation, really. Your presentation. Я прошу взять слово Duška.
And I would like to give the floor to Duška Bogonović.
Добрый день.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Distinguished colleagues and dear hosts, thank you very much for this opportunity for my society, ISOCARP, to present the results of our research over the last 3 months. There we go. ISOCARP is the International Society of City and Regional Planners, for those who are not familiar. We were commissioned by, am I pointing in the right way? Is it like, yeah, okay. We were commissioned about a half a year ago by the Moscow Urban Forum to conduct a research on global trends in urban development. And I have the honor of presenting the work of several members. There were 6 of us who did the research, and I was only the leader and the person who in the end synthesized the final report, which will be available. That was my experiment with Cyrillic. It didn't go quite well. These are the members of my team, and some of them are here. This is my support in the audience. Thank you for being here. My presentation, of course, has to be very compact and short, and so these are the key elements of it. I have introduced the team. I would like to explain a little bit of background about our research project. I will tell you what the case studies were. We studied 11 cities around the world, which were in some way comparable to Moscow. A little bit about the methodology, and then the most important part, our findings and recommendations, which I hope would be relevant for Moscow and other Russian cities. So the deal was struck in December 2015 that we would deliver this report. So here we are. The report is about about megacities and their mega projects. So the prefix mega is a very important word in this job. We are trying to present a global overview of the key issues and key trends, and in particular key or best practices, in fact, so that we can learn something from these cities. Mega cities have mega problems. They have mega impact on the environment and the society, and they are about mega investment. Trillions of dollars are supposed to be invested over the next few decades into urban infrastructure worldwide. Some people have called that the biggest project of the whole 21st century, the investment into urban infrastructure. Our focus was double on mobility and mega projects. By mega projects, we assume that they could be both public projects, which typically infrastructure, and private projects, which typically are examples of real estate. Moscow, of course, is familiar with both kinds of projects and is doing them on a truly mega scale, as you all very well know. It is actually a global trend. Projects like that are pretty much all over the world. And when I did my initial review of what is happening around the world in terms of mega projects, I got a bit concerned. It is my impression now that the research is over, it is my impression that we're pretty much doing these huge projects in a kind of business as usual manner, in a kind of conventional way, which we have learned throughout the 20th century. Future always contains surprises. So what might be the surprises that might force us to change the way we do big projects? I see them in two areas. For short, in technology and ecology. By technology, I mean not just IT, information technology, I mean also communications technology, environmental technology, transport technology, building technology. And by ecology, of course, that is the code word for the global environment. You all will be familiar with the enormous pace of change and constant innovation in the area, in all areas of technology. So surprises are frequent. We call them disruptions. Disruptions are indeed happening all the time. I was quite surprised myself when just last week I discovered that Sweden now has an electric road. So electric buses and cars can recharge as they drive on the road. That is really a new thing. So it is this kind of disruption that could change the way we design cities. The other area of disruption or nasty surprises, of course, might be the global environment. And I guess I don't need to explain that in Russia. Some scientists believe Siberia will determine the fate of this planet because of the enormous amount of methane deposits in the permafrost areas of in the north of Russia and Canada as well. So there might be some nasty surprises in that area as well. So we should be concerned about the way we run megacities and the way we do big projects. Here I have tried to condense my concern by saying we are 16 years into the 21st century, and there is so much that we do with the 20th century thinking that needs to change. These were the 11 cities that we studied in our case studies: Paris, Mumbai, Hong Kong, Wuhan, New York, Dubai, London, Johannesburg, Dansk, Gdynia, Buenos Aires, and my hometown, Auckland. So we had a global sample of 11 big cities. We studied them as case studies. It was mostly desk research, but we also consulted local experts, and in all cases, people were very well familiar. The researchers were very well familiar with the place. So we trust our findings. Sorry, I just missed one. The findings were in 4 areas. One group of findings was about growth. The second one was about the mega projects. The third one was about mobility and how it shapes urban form. And the last one was about infrastructure. I will not go into the details in the interest of time. However, what kind of comes out of all of these findings as an overall lesson is here. The more advanced or more mature cities, as I would call them, prefer intensification and polycentric development over expansion and monocentric development. That's one general conclusion. They also prefer strategic over ad hoc planning and long-term vision over short-term gain. Mature cities or megacities are seriously concerned about the environmental impacts of urban growth. And lastly, mature megacities are using the smart city concept to achieve the green and clean city. So how is this relevant for Moscow? We believe it is. So we have come up with 5 areas of recommendation. The first one is about regional approach, planning for big cities should always be at the scale of a whole region. It's not just a city. Mega cities are actually city regions. Geographers in the room will be familiar with that term. The second point is about the urban form. This is quite important. I'll dwell on this a little bit. The compact urban fabric and polycentric structure are the key and complementary spatial concepts. They will never eliminate, though, urban sprawl, but they do have the power to ameliorate its worst excesses. So this kind of dichotomy between compact city and urban sprawl, it is very important to understand. Urban sprawl will not go away. I actually think it's more important to think about urban sprawl rather than compact cities. Regeneration is, of course, about using the best opportunities in existing cities to redevelop land rather than expand the city further. Sustainability is about environmental issues and the need for cities to operate within the carrying capacity of the environment.
Duška, I'm sorry, time is over. How much do you need more?
Say 2 minutes. That okay?
Just try one.
Okay, thank you. Well, here we are. This is the conclusion. So as you could see in the previous slide, we see resilience as kind of the last issue, but actually the top concern, the issue of resilience, ability to survive shocks and crises. So here's the conclusion. The future of megacities will be determined by technological innovation and our ecological situation, not by sheer desire for more growth and ever bigger projects. The cities have been the engines of ecological destruction, but now they have to become our engines of ecological restoration. Only the mega projects which use smart technology and green technology for the ecological restoration agenda will be successful in the long term. The future of the urban knowledge economy is in greenovation, which is the code word for innovation for urban ecological solutions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bogdanovic.
Good afternoon. While they're looking for my presentation, hopefully the clock is not ticking. I'm from the Higher School of Urbanism, and just as a continuation of the previous presentation, I hope that we'll speak about the polycentricity of Moscow. Now, clock's ticking now. Some context, what's polycentricity? Well, polycentricity is the antonym of monocentricity. Alonso introduced this monocentric city in 1964, where a city where everything is located in one center. Then in 1982, Fujita and Ogawa created this model of polycentric city. I called it industrial polycentricity because those who succeeded them, then McDonald and Macmillan, they focused on the industrial polycentricity, and then post-industrial polycentricity proposed by Michael Batty, Mr. Vysokovsky, Pomorov, and Tchaikovsky. These are centers where people go by their own will, not places where they have to go. Sometimes these two combine. So it's shops, barber shops, libraries. So normally these places are next to places of work, places where we live. So I think in Moscow it makes sense to look for this kind of polycentricity. Technically, what that is, so monocentricity is kind of an indicator that we can measure, and on the left side you see that this indicator goes down or decreases from the center to the outskirts. So why do we need polycentricity? Well, according to the economists, polycentricity rises where people make more money and the cost of life goes down. So basically, transport flows are optimized. The functionality of the city is more diversified. There are more services in the cities. So our goal was to define the polycentric structure of Moscow, to see how you can connect the new development of Moscow to the polycentricity and define the characteristics of these centers. Tools, we used the non-equal district model of Mr. Vysokovsky. The idea behind it was to look for the post-industrial polycentricity. We tested it in dozens of cities in Russia. There are several papers on that, and it is actively used when justifying city planning and district planning. Raw data, I think I will skip this stage. Just I'd like to say that we gathered a lot of data of places visited in Moscow. So how many centers there are in Moscow? Well, only one. You might think so, of course. If you look at the density of the service points, at the service facilities, you might think so, but actually there are a lot of them. And if you look over time how the structure changed from this map, it's a rare case where maps are not a good example. You might think it's a chaos. So it's better to use a chart and not a map. So what happened to the city centers? Well, the first and second level centers, they grew in the recent years and then they stabilized, and third level centers appeared. So we see this as a relaunch of a cycle of balance.
Здесь мы можем увидеть, каким образом, собственно,
So we see how centers survived, how they existed, with dark red. These are the centers that were the most powerful starting 2005 and are still powerful till now. Then you see second level centers. You see how dark brown or brown centers become a lower level center. So now localization. Centers for 2015. So construction of housing and non-residential buildings in numbers and in units and in square meters. So you see that the growth rate is higher where there are no attraction points. Where there are attraction points, the volume is higher. So developers, they try to increase the profitability of their projects thanks to the location. So we looked at the center's characteristics, transport accessibility. So red to green, that's a scale from 0 to 10 million people. So color marks how you can access this area. So it's an accessibility map. So on the left side, you see the first level centers. They're closer to the historic center of the city, but not necessarily located there. And you see second level centers, which are located a little bit far from the city center, from the historical center. So if we split them by categories, you can have this kind of charts which show actually again the accessibility. So the first level centers have the higher transport accessibility. And of course, transport accessibility for the second and third level centers is lower. But nevertheless, they have sufficient transport accessibility to become the next level center. Then we looked at the number of visits or traffic thanks to Foursquare and WhoMap. So we looked at where people go and how much the real estate costs. It's not that big if we calculate rubles per square meter, explained by the fact that there is an average level of prices on the market and they cannot differ too much because prices for instance, rent are quite closely linked to the income level. Well, Moscow, as a conclusion, is a polycentric city. Despite what we think about it, and based on other research data, we see that people really don't go to the city center every day, or they often don't leave their homes more than 2 kilometers outside the place they live. So there should be centers where they can go, of course. Location and how centers are created thanks to the development projects, but where the accessibility, the transport accessibility is high, and where voluntarily visited sites are located. So, of course, developers use these key attractiveness points because people go there more often and transport accessibility is better. You have 1 minute. No, you don't have any minutes because 9 minutes have passed. 15 seconds. So this was a retrospective analysis showing how centers were created. So it is a tool, a method to forecast how city can change in the future depending on our plans. Thank you. Sorry for this. Good afternoon. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. I'll try to be brief presenting my study. We did it last year and this year for the Moscow Urban Forum. It's the space and economic development of the city, hidden results. The study is uploaded to the internet, so you can have a look at the e-version with all the charts and all the points I'm going to present right now. So we looked at 8 cities. These cities were chosen by the regional conference of cities and territories tomorrow. So what are the questions we asked? We tried to look at the municipal budgets, and we tried to look at how cities develop in space. We tried to look at how city management, city government correlates with the economy of the city. So we tried to analyze regulations and laws, city construction legislation, tender results, construction tender results, and the municipal budgets and targeted programs that were active during this period we looked at. So why we chose this topic? Well, the overall hard economic situation really affects cities. So we tried to look if there are any internal resources in the cities that would allow to reduce a little bit the negative effect of the economic environment. Of course, it all leads to inter-budget transfers which become more volatile. So can cities live without these transfers? Now, the income base of the cities, on whether cities can survive without external financing, and a more methodological approach, we try to look at the cities not so much from the point of view of design or architecture, but from the point of view of this down-to-earth approach of basically accounting, budgeting. So a couple of cases, we'll try to explain our logic, and then you'll see the rest in my study. So if we look at Samara city, we tried to map city construction projects from 2010 to 2018. And then we also added engineering infrastructure that is required for this residential construction. So it's quite logical. Houses are being built, engineering systems are being attached to these buildings. But then it happens that without the right calculation, without the right planning, it happened that all the money the city had was spent on this program. So we saw that without long-term calculations, we saw that city spend everything they have quite quickly, and they don't have money to continue this project. Then specific location buildings, or buildings built in already built residential areas. This is a matter of city planning. So we looked at Rostov-on-Don, and we mapped the data of construction permits. So we saw that a city that already lacks of power capacity and water, we saw that with all these issues, the city issues construction permits for buildings of over 20 stories high. So what are the outcomes? Of course, a lot of issues. So this number of stories should, number of floors should be, of course, of consideration in this city policy. And then the land use. Cities do not really understand what land use is. There have been changes on, for instance, the extreme parameters of the size of the land lots, and small changes that can be made to the parcels. But when we looked at Kazan, at all the city permits, city land permits, we saw that it has quite an impact on the city, because 15% of the city surface were affected by these construction permits. So, for instance, civic spaces become residential spaces, and so on. And we made this conclusion that cities should pay more attention to all the information they have. It's important for the city decisions to be framed by the overall strategies. Well, it's not a discovery, of course, but we once again proved that private property is a big factor in the city development. Parcels that were sold in the 90s are not a resource today for development. Yes, in the master plans, we see that factories will be converted into residential areas, but these are just projects and few tools can be used there. So what to do with these huge industrial areas in private hands, because sometimes they don't even have one private owner, they have several private owners, and you don't know how to find that. But from one master plan to another master plan, we continue saying that we will convert these areas. So then how to work with these areas? It is very important for the cities to understand how realistic their plans are considering this towards these private properties. And one more point, we've analyzed city budgets, town budgets, in terms of their legislation. First discovery, the eternal discussion with the municipalities, the income tax. Income tax is considered to be a tax levied by the municipalities, but the Ministry of Finance tells that it is not a city tax. So when cities were, say, cleared from the non-city levied taxes, we saw that only 25% of the taxes were levied by the cities themselves. So only 25% of the income the city makes can be managed by the city, and 60% of these 25% are linked to land. So this is actually what the city can do with this. This is the money the city can manage, because these are construction permits and other sources. And of course, if we look at all the projects, they all look good. But if we look at the external factors that affect city policies, we see that cities have little budgets, a lot of restrictions, so they have to ask regional authorities for more money. Then you have the construction industry that requires parcels and construction projects, and then you have surfaces that have to be built just because you have to build them.
And what can we conclude from it? So as we see it, the most strategic conclusion should be today that the cities sometimes do not see, or maybe see but do not fulfill the connection of what is happening today and what we are ready for tomorrow. Because very often we settle some relevant issues which are good for today. So we fund the budget, we increase revenues, and we develop some square meters. But it is not the only issue which is important. Not only today is important. We are to look in the future and working today with the area and economic